This video will discuss Piaget's stages of cognitive development. So Jean Piaget was a biologist, and in the 1920s, he proposed that children actually make mental adaptations to new observations, and this is the way that cognition develops. He suggested there was two ways that children can make these mental adaptations. They could assimilate or they could accommodate. Now, assimilation is absorbing new information into existing cognitive structures. Now, when we think about these cognitive structures, these are the schemas that we talked about earlier. Going back to those schemas, those concepts, those prototypes, Piaget was the first one to really develop these terms. And so the idea is that a child might have a mental category or concept of what a dog is, but perhaps they've really only seen big dogs like German Shepherds or Golden Retrievers. So then when they see a Chihuahua for the first time, they have to assimilate that into their concept of a dog. They have to add that, and they have to mentally adapt that cognitive schema. So assimilation is absorbing new information into your existing cognitive schema. On the other hand, accommodation is modifying your existing cognitive structure in response to new information. So let's say children learn to recognize horses. They're around horses. But then for a while, all four-legged animals that are large are horses, whether it's a zebra, a giraffe, an antelope, or a deer. And then finally, at one point, they realize that they need to modify that existing cognitive structure and create other concepts that are related to the concept of a horse, but are different than that concept of a horse. So they have to accommodate, modify their existing cognitive structure. So Piaget developed 4 stages of development. And at these stages, he said that new reasoning skills depend on the development of previous ones and are determined by the maturation at that given age. So he observed that the thought processes and problem strategies of children aren't random, or at least that's what he thought. And he thought that they reflected the level of maturity that they had at a given age and the abilities that they had at a certain age. And so he felt there were 4 different stages: the sensory motor stage, the pre-operational stage, concrete operations, and formal operations. And we'll go through each one of these in detail. So the first stage is the sensory motor stage, and this goes from birth to 2 years old. At this stage, children are learning through concrete actions. And you'll see children at this age, they're always putting things in their mouth, right? So they're coordinating sensory information with their bodily movements. They're putting things in their mouths. That's one of the ways that they learn about them. They push a button on a toy and it lights up or it makes a sound. So they do it again. They're repeating. They're learning cause and effect. They drop something off of their high chair. You pick it up. They drop it again. Now, they're not doing that to make you angry. They're doing that because they're learning through these concrete actions. This happens, or I do this, and this happens. At this stage, children also develop something called object permanence. So this is an understanding that an object continues to exist even when you can't see or touch it. So this allows them to hold the object in their mind when it's not present. So, for example, maybe remembering an image of their mother's face to soothe them when she's not present. Understanding that when you take something away and you hide it, that you've hidden it, and they start to look for it. So it's really nice kind of in that early infancy stage when they don't. You take something away, out of sight, out of mind. That doesn't last forever. And this is also going to allow them in the next stage to use mental imagery and symbols, and that's important in pretend play. And pretend play is very important in cognitive development. So please make sure to watch the video linked on the Canvas page to learn more about object permanence. The next stage is the pre-operational stage, and it goes from age 2 to 7. So at this stage, you see the use of symbols and language really accelerating. Pretend play at this stage is really important. So you see here is my daughter Carrie, and then over here you have my other 2 dressed up as pirates having a blast. And so while this use of symbols and pretend play is really important in cognitive development, Piaget really focused in on the limitations of children thinking at this age. So one of the things he said was that they lack the cognitive abilities needed for abstract thinking and mental operations. So mental operations being able to hold numbers in their head and do, multiplication and division. And remember, though, that this is a theory, because if you think today what children are doing in 1st and 2nd grade, they're already doing multiplication. They're already doing division. and they start adding and subtracting, and often in kindergarten. And so, whereas back when Piaget developed the theory, children weren't doing those things in school. And so we now realize if we give children the right tools, they can understand and grasp these mental operations. So keep in mind that while this is his theory, these are just theories, and there are sometimes problems with these theories. Piaget also focused in on the idea that children at this age are egocentric. So if you think about a child at this age, they really can only understand the things that they've experienced. And so a lot of times that does lead to them only really seeing the world from their point of view and not being able to see other points of view. And we'll talk more about egocentrism on the next slide. He also felt that children at this age couldn't grasp the concept of conservation. And again, we'll have another slide for that in just a moment. So again, egocentrism is this idea that you can only see the world from your point of view and you can't see it from others. Now, he used what's called the 3-mountain task to demonstrate this egocentrism. And this is where you have a doll or a toy on one side sitting in a chair, and you have this 3-dimensional model, and you put the child on one side. And then if you go ahead and look at the video that's linked on the Canvas page, it's a really good example of it. But basically, they take this child and they show him all 4 sides. So he sees he or she sees the perspective from all 4 sides. And then they ask them, what do they see when they're sitting here? And of course they can tell them. But then they ask, what is the doll seeing on the other side? And at this age, at this pre-operational stage, they're unable to. And so that he thought was a evidence that children were egocentric at this age. Now keep in mind that is a very complex task. Now the idea of conservation is the understanding that physical properties of an object can remain the same even when their form or appearance changes. So for instance, you have a ball of Play-Doh and you roll it out into a snake. Children see those 2 different things, they may think that they're not the same amount. So there's different types of conservation. The conservation of substance, which I just mentioned, do 2 pieces of clay have the same amount? And there's also the conservation of number. So here you have 2, so let's say 2 balls of clay. You keep one as a ball, you flatten one out. Do they still have the same amount of clay? And according to Piaget, children in this pre-operational stage wouldn't understand that they are the same. And then the same thing here. You have these 12 pennies or circles or whatever it is, and then you spread one out. Children at this stage will often say that there's more on the bottom than there is on the top because, again, they don't understand this concept of conservation. So again, please watch the video that's linked on the Canvas page because it'll give you a couple good examples of this concept of conservation and show you children's answers at different ages. Now, when we get into the concrete operation stage, this is from age 7 to 12, thinking's still really grounded in concrete experiences. So tied to things that they've actually experienced. So still the child really can't think beyond what they've experienced. So while they might say, oh yes, I'm going to go off to college, they don't understand really at this point what going off to college is, unless maybe they have had a family member that's done so. So at this stage, according to Piaget, their cognitive skills develop rapidly. So conservation, understanding the concept of conservation is achieved, understanding reversibility, understanding causation, and then mental operations, the ability to add, subtract, multiply, and divide. This is the age that Piaget felt that they were capable of that. Of course, we already discussed that we know that children are capable of this at an earlier age now. And then in the 4th stage, and this was Piaget's final stage of development, which went from 12 to adulthood, he believed that teenagers were capable of abstract reasoning, comparing and classifying ideas, thinking about things, reasoning about things that they hadn't personally experienced, which allows them to think about the future, that they could then systematically search for solutions, use inductive and deductive reasoning. So here again, if X, then Y, thinking about the future, thinking about what getting married, imagining what that might be like, imagining what their future job might entail, and things like that. So often contemporary developmental psychologists add a 5th stage to Piaget's stages, which is post-formal operations, realizing that cognitive development doesn't end in our teenage years. Our thinking does seem to change a little bit. So as we get older, the situation, the context, the circumstances plays into our reasoning and our thinking. We use logic, but we also are influenced by our emotions as well. And so that is the basics of Piaget's theory of cognitive development.